Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the successor of Green Arrow. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The glow of a single monitor was the only sun in Izuku Midoriya's personal universe. It cast long, dancing shadows across walls papered with heroes, a pantheon of modern gods. Figures like the Flash, a crimson blur of hope, and Superman, the golden standard of an age, were there. But they were relegated to the periphery, like honored but distant relatives. The central shrine, the space directly above his desk, was dedicated to a different kind of hero, a man. The poster was old, the corners softened and tacked up with a reverence usually reserved for religious icons. It depicted a figure cloaked in darkness and green, a hood pulled low to shadow a face set with grim determination. In his hands he held not a scepter of power nor a fist crackling with cosmic energy, but a simple, elegant recurved bow, an arrow nocked and ready. Below him, the name was emblazoned in stark, bold letters, Green Arrow. Okay, see, that's a bola arrow. Izuku mumbled, his voice a low, rapid-fire commentary only he could follow. His nose was inches from the screen, replaying a grainy news clip for the 17th time. Standard non-lethal crowd control. But the deployment, it's flawless. He fires it high, letting gravity assist the velocity and widen the spread of the chords. He's not aiming at the three targets. He's aiming at the space between them. His fingers flew across a fresh page in a slightly battered notebook labeled, in his own neat hand, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. A flurry of graphite strokes captured the scene, the trajectory arc, the estimated release velocity, the precise moment the bola's mechanism triggered. The villain's quirk was minor tactile telekinesis, limited to objects under 50 pounds. Green Arrow didn't engage directly. He targeted the environment, used an acid-tipped arrow, low concentration, just enough to compromise the integrity of the fire escape, to create a barrier. Brilliant. He forces the villain into a bottleneck, then uses the bola for a clean, efficient takedown. No casualties, minimal property damage. He leaned back, a small, satisfied sigh escaping his lips. His room was a testament to his obsession. A cheap, plastic replica of Green Arrow's bow hung on the wall, a stringless, powerless icon. A small, articulated figure of the Emerald Archer stood on his desk, posed in a full draw, aiming at a Bakugo-themed pencil holder. This was Izuku's world. In a society defined by quirks, by the genetic lottery of superhuman abilities, Izuku had been born with nothing. A blank slate. A statistical anomaly in an age of wonders. For years, that fact had been a crushing weight, a source of endless despair. He had wept when the doctor had shown him the X-ray of his foot, the extra joint in his pinky toe that marked him as part of the obsolete 20% of the population. He had rewatched the video of All Might's debut 1,000 times. Tears streaming down his face, clinging to a dream that science had declared impossible. But then, his focus had shifted. All Might was a god. He was born with a power that could change the weather with a single punch. You couldn't learn to be All Might. You were either chosen by fate, or you weren't. Green Arrow, however, he was different. The news reports, the vigilante blogs, the deep web forums all agreed on one thing: Green Arrow was quirkless. He was a man who had, through sheer force of will, training, and intellect, placed himself among the gods. He wasn't a symbol of peace born from power. He was a symbol of justice forged in darkness. He was proof. He was the flickering ember of hope that Izuku's own dream wasn't entirely impossible. It was just improbable. So improbable that to anyone else, it was laughable. Still staring at that dusty old relic, Deku? The voice, sharp and explosive as the quirk that powered it, shattered Izuku's concentration. He flinched, instinctively hunching his shoulders as Katsuki Bakugo loomed in the doorway of his middle school classroom the next day. Behind him, his two usual sycophants snickered. Izuku hastily tried to close his notebook, but Bakugo's hand shot out, slamming it flat on the desk. The crack of the impact echoed in the quiet room. Bakugo's crimson eyes scanned the page, a sneer twisting his lips. Trick Arrow Analysis? He read aloud, his voice dripping with derision. Are you for real? You're still wasting your time on this quirkless nobody? He's not a nobody, Kakin. Izuku stammered, his face flushing with a mixture of fear and protective indignation. Green Arrow is one of the most effective street-level heroes in the world. His tactical acumen is to shoot pointy sticks at people, Bakugo retorted, cutting him off with a sharp gesture. He tapped a finger on Izuku's drawing of a grappling hook arrow. This is a toy. A relic. We live in a world where a guy can level a city block with a sneeze, and you're idolizing a caveman with a bow. It's pathetic, one of Bakugo's friends, the one with the extendable fingers, snorted. Yeah, why would you want to be him when you could be someone cool, like the Flash or Endeavor? Because Deku can't be them, Bakugo said, his voice dropping to a low, cruel growl. His gaze bored into Izuku, pinning him to his seat. He's got nothing, so he clings to the other nothing hero, hoping it makes him feel better about being a useless Deku. He snatched the notebook from the desk. No, please! Kaken, give it back! Izuku cried, scrambling to his feet. Bakugo held it just out of reach, a sadistic grin spreading across his face. You know, I'm doing you a favor. These worthless dreams of yours are just holding you back. You need to accept reality. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the notebook out the open classroom window. Izuku gasped and rushed to the window, his heart sinking as he watched it land with a soft plop in the ornamental koi pond below. The pages, filled with hours of painstaking research and analysis, began to darken as they soaked through. The ink blurred, his detailed drawings of fletching patterns and arrowhead mechanisms bleeding into indistinct smudges of gray. Here's a dose of reality for you, Deku, Bakugo said, his voice a low threat by Izuku's ear. A small, popping explosion from his palm made Izuku jump. The air smelled of burnt sugar. A quirkless loser like you can't ever be a hero. You're less than a zero. So stop dreaming and try to be a halfway decent pebble on the side of the road for the rest of us to walk past. He shoved Izuku's shoulder, a final act of casual dominance, and stalked out of the room, his followers trailing in his wake like pilot fish. Izuku remained at the window, trembling, watching his dreams sink. The humiliation was a hot, bitter lump in his throat. He wasn't angry. He was just tired. Tired of being the butt of the joke, the cautionary tale, the boy born a century too late. With a heavy heart, he made his way outside and fished the sopping wet notebook from the pond. The koi nibbled at the cover, indifferent to his despair. He held the dripping book, a sad, pulpy metaphor for his own aspirations, and began the long, lonely walk home. Star City was a sprawling metropolis, a concrete and steel testament to human ambition that scraped the sky. Izuku's neighborhood, a quieter Japanese district known as the Glades, was a network of smaller streets, cozy ramen shops, and aging apartment buildings. It was on his way through this familiar territory, cutting through a bustling market street to save time, that his day went from miserable to terrifying. It started with a scream, then a crash of shattering glass. People scattered, shouting, a wave of panic flowing down the street. Izuku was swept up in it for a moment before his ingrained curiosity, or perhaps his foolishness, took over. He ducked into an alley, his heart hammering against his ribs, and peered around the corner. The chaos was centered on a 24-hour convenience store. The front window was a gaping maw of broken glass. Inside, a large, brutish man was bellowing, holding the terrified teenage cashier by the collar. He was built like a refrigerator, with a slab of a face and knuckles scarred from 100 brawls. "Nobody moves!" the man roared, his voice thick and gravelly. His other hand swept a shelf of snacks to the floor. A faint, stony gray sheen seemed to flicker across his skin as he moved. A kinetic quirk. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, but they were taking their time, forming a perimeter. This was standard procedure in a quirk-related incident. They had to assess the threat and wait for a pro-hero with a suitable power set to arrive. It was safe. It was logical. It was also agonizingly slow. The girl behind the counter was sobbing, her face pale with terror. Izuku's mind, the same one Bakugo had scorned just an hour earlier, kicked into overdrive. Villain's name unknown. Quirk appears to be a form of impact-activated reinforcement. His skin shimmers just before he moves or strikes. Possibly kinetic hardening. He becomes more durable while in motion. Weakness? Probably requires conscious activation, or maybe he's vulnerable when stationary. His hand tightened on the strap of his backpack, his knuckles white. He was useless. A spectator. A pebble on the side of the road. All his analysis meant nothing if he couldn't do anything. And then, a shadow detached itself from the rooftop across the street. It moved with an impossible silence, a whisper of motion against the backdrop of the city's din. A line shot out, embedding itself in the brickwork above the store with a soft thwip. The figure swung down, a verdant blur, landing in a perfect, soundless crouch in the alley opposite Izuku's. Izuku's breath hitched. He would know that silhouette anywhere. The hood, the bow held at a low ready, the quiver on his back. Green Arrow. It was him. In the flesh. Not on a screen, not in a drawing, but here. 10 meters away. He was bigger than Izuku had imagined, broader in the shoulders, and he moved with a predatory grace that no news camera could ever truly capture. Green Arrow peered around the corner, assessing the situation with a cold, professional calm. His movements were clipped, efficient. He drew an arrow from his quiver, the motion a fluid poem of practiced violence. The arrowhead was a thick, blunt cylinder. A flash bang. The vigilante stepped out of the alley. "Let the girl go," he commanded. His voice was electronically distorted, a low, menacing rasp. "This doesn't have to get any uglier." The villain, who Izuku now mentally dubbed Rhino, laughed. "Green Arrow! The corkless fraud. What are you gonna do, old man? Shoot me with a stick?" To prove his point, Rhino shoved the cashier toward the hero and charged. The gray sheen on his skin intensified. Green Arrow didn't flinch. He sidestepped the clumsy attack, moving like a matador, and fired the flash-bang arrow at the wall just behind Rhino. The resulting bang and brilliant white light were deafening and blinding. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, spots dancing in his vision. When he opened them, Rhino was staggering, disoriented. Green Arrow was already moving, closing the distance, his bow now a melee weapon. He slammed it into the back of Rhino's knee, forcing him to buckle. He followed up with a swift, brutal strike to the man's temple. But Rhino was tougher than he looked. He roared, shaking his head to clear it, and swung a wild, backhand blow. The attack was telegraphed, clumsy, but powerful. Green Arrow raised his bow to block, but the force of the impact was immense. The carbon fiber bow shuddered, and Green Arrow was thrown back, stumbling into a tall, metal shelving unit just outside the store. The entire unit, laden with heavy bags of potting soil and ceramic gnomes, groaned under the impact and began to topple. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku saw it all with horrifying clarity. Green Arrow, trying to regain his footing. The massive shelving unit leaning, its metal legs screeching against the pavement. Rhino, a cruel grin on his face, beginning another charge. The police were too far away. The pro-heroes weren't here. His idol, the man who was proof that you didn't need a quirk to be a hero, was about to be crushed or beaten to a pulp. Useless. Bakugo's voice echoed in his head. A pebble on the side of the road. Something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a conscious decision. It wasn't a heroic impulse. It was pure, unadulterated instinct, fueled by a decade of meticulous observation. His brain, that overactive, analytical engine, saw a problem and calculated a solution. The scaffolding, next to the convenience store, a small construction project had been abandoned for the day. A section of metal scaffolding stood a few feet away, held together by old, rusted bolts. Izuku had passed it 100 times. He knew one of the support struts was loose. He'd seen it wobble in the wind. Target, Rhino. Objective, create a diversion. Tool, backpack. Weight, approximately 6 kilograms. Variable, rusted support strut. Probability of success, low. Probability of getting himself killed, high. He didn't care. His body was already moving. He burst out of the alley, a scrawny, green-haired blur of motion. He didn't shout. He didn't draw attention to himself. He just ran, his legs pumping, his mind a silent storm of calculations. Angle, trajectory, force. He swung his heavy, waterlogged backpack off his shoulder, spinning with the momentum. He put every ounce of his terrified, desperate strength into the throw. The backpack sailed through the air, an unwieldy projectile, and struck the rusted bolt on the scaffolding with a loud, metallic clang. The effect was instantaneous and far more dramatic than he could have hoped. The compromised joint shattered. With a deafening screech of tortured metal, a crossbar and 2 long pipes broke free and came crashing down onto the pavement, right in Rhino's path. Rhino, who had been focused entirely on the downed green arrow, flinched violently at the sudden noise and chaos to his left. He instinctively turned his head, his quirk-fueled charge faltering for a single, crucial second. It was all the time a hero needed. A green arrow, this one tipped with a wicked-looking point, flew past Izuku's head with a sound like tearing silk. It struck not Rhino's hardened skin, but the soft, vulnerable joint of his knee. The man bellowed in pain, his leg giving way. As he fell, a second arrow, a bola just like the one Izuku had analyzed, wrapped itself around his arms, pinning them to his torso. Green arrow was on him in a flash. There was a final, decisive blow, and the rampaging villain collapsed into a motionless heap. Silence descended, broken only by the approaching sirens and the whimpering of the cashier. Green arrow stood over his defeated foe, his chest rising and falling. Then, slowly, he turned his head. The white lenses of his mask seemed to stare directly through Izuku, into the very core of his being. Izuku froze, his blood turning to ice. He had interfered. He had involved himself. He was going to be yelled at, arrested, told how stupid and reckless he had been. He could already hear the lecture. But before the hero could move or speak, the first of the pro-heroes, a local favorite named Kamui Woods, arrived on the scene, his wooden arms already forming a perimeter. Green Arrow gave one last look at Izuku, a look that held an unreadable mix of emotions, before firing a grappling hook arrow to a nearby rooftop and vanishing into the urban jungle as silently as he had appeared. Izuku was left standing there, heart hammering, the smell of ozone and fear in the air, the world spinning around him. He had seen his hero. And in his own small, terrifying way, he had helped him. The walk home was a blur. Izuku moved on autopilot, his mind replaying the last 10 minutes in a frantic, endless loop. The clang of his backpack hitting the strut. The hiss of the arrow flying past his ear. The unblinking white lenses of Green Arrow's mask. He'd been so stupid. So reckless. What if he had missed? What if he had hit a civilian? What if he had only managed to make Rhino angrier? He should have stayed hidden. He should have let the heroes handle it. He stumbled into his apartment, mumbled a greeting to his concerned mother, and locked himself in his room. He didn't turn on the computer. He didn't reach for a notebook. He just sat on his bed, his wet backpack leaking a puddle onto the floor, and trembled. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a hollow, terrifying feeling in its wake. Was that what it was like? To stand in the face of danger? It wasn't glorious or exciting. It was just scary. Hours passed. Darkness fell outside his window, painting Star City in neon and shadow. He was just starting to feel a semblance of normalcy return when a soft, almost imperceptible thump sounded from his fire escape. Izuku froze. His building was old. The fire escape groaned and creaked under its own weight. No one used it. He crept toward the window, his heart beginning to pound again. He peered through the blinds. There was a figure standing there, a dark silhouette against the city lights. Not in a costume, just a man in a dark jacket and jeans. But there was an intimidating stillness to him, an aura of coiled power that made the hair on Izuku's arms stand on end. The man's head turned, and even in the dim light, Izuku could see the tired, world-weary eyes, the close-cropped blonde hair, and the faint traces of scars around his chin. Izuku's mind blanked. He recognized that face. From news conferences, from magazine covers, from charity galas. Oliver Queen. The billionaire playboy turned philanthropist. The man long rumored, in the darkest corners of the internet, to be the financial backer of Green Arrow. No. It couldn't be. As if sensing his thoughts, Oliver Queen raised a hand and tapped lightly on the glass. Izuku, moving as if in a trance, unlocked the window and slid it open. The cool night air washed over him. Oliver Queen didn't move from the fire escape. He just looked at Izuku, his expression unreadable. "That was a stupid thing to do," he said. His voice was quiet, calm, but it carried an undeniable weight. It wasn't the electronically distorted rasp of the arrow, but the core of authority was the same. Izuku flinched, curling in on himself. I know, I'm sorry, he was in trouble, and He couldn't finish. The words wouldn't come. You threw a $60 backpack full of waterlogged textbooks at a piece of rusted scaffolding to create a sound-based diversion. Oliver continued, his tone flat, analytical. You calculated the structural weakness, the trajectory, the timing. All in about 3 seconds. You weren't trying to be a hero. You were solving a problem. Izuku stared, his mouth agape. How could he possibly know that? I know because I was there, Oliver said, answering the unspoken question. And because I do the same thing. Now I'm going to ask you a question, and I want an honest answer. Why did you do it? The question hung in the air between them. Why? Because Green Arrow was his hero. Because he wanted to prove Bakugo wrong? Because he was tired of being useless? The dam inside him broke. All the years of frustration, of whispered insults, of shattered dreams, came pouring out. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and shameful, but he couldn't stop them. Because I want to be a hero, he choked out, the words a raw, painful confession. More than anything. But I can't. The doctor, my quirk. I don't have one. Everyone tells me to give up, that someone like me can't save people. That I'm just a Deku. Useless. He finally looked up, his vision blurry with tears, meeting the billionaire's gaze. But he, Green Arrow, he does it. He doesn't have a quirk either. He stands with gods and saves people with nothing but his strength, and his mind and his will. He's proof that it's not impossible. Izuku's voice dropped to a desperate whisper. When I saw him in trouble, my body just moved. I couldn't just stand there and watch. I couldn't. Oliver Queen remained silent for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. He wasn't looking at a fanboy. He was looking at the raw, desperate, unbreakable spirit of a boy who refused to accept the hand fate had dealt him. He saw the same reckless fire that had once driven him, the same burning need to stand for something, to protect the helpless. He saw a kindred soul. He stepped off the fire escape and into Izuku's room, closing the window behind him. The small room, with its shrine to his alter ego, suddenly felt charged with an almost sacred energy. Oliver's expression softened, the hard lines around his eyes easing. You've got the heart, kid, he said, his voice imbued with a weary, profound gravity. More than most pro-heroes I've met. He took a step closer, and the full weight of his presence seemed to press down on Izuku. This was not just a billionaire. This was a warrior. But heart gets you killed. The words were a cold, hard slap of reality. Izuku's tears stopped, his breath catching in his throat. Oliver looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the poster, the notebook, the cheap replica bow. He saw the years of study, the desperate yearning. He saw potential, buried under a mountain of insecurity and a lifetime of being told no. He turned back to Izuku, his eyes intense, searching. You have the will. You have the mind. But you lack the tools, the training, the discipline. What you did today was brave, but it was also a 1 in a million shot. In my world you don't get a second chance. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He was offering something more than an autograph, more than an encouraging word. He was offering a path. A dark, painful, and dangerous path. Let's see if we can give you the skill to back it up. The silence in Izuku Midoriya's bedroom was a living thing. It was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the frantic, bird-like flutter of his own heart. Oliver Queen stood before him, not as a rumor or a photograph, but as a solid, breathing presence that seemed to consume all the oxygen in the small space. His words, "Let's see if we can give you the skill to back it up," echoed in the quiet, not as a promise of glory, but as a grim, weighty challenge. Izuku's mind, usually a whirlwind of analysis and frantic hypotheticals, was utterly, terrifyingly blank. He felt like a computer that had been fed an impossible command, his processors seizing in a cascade of errors. Oliver Queen. Green Arrow. Here. In his room. Offering him, what? A chance? A death sentence? I don't. Izuku stammered, his voice a reedy whisper. How? Oliver's expression remained unyielding, but a flicker of understanding crossed his features. He knew he had just detonated a bomb in the middle of this boy's life. Questions later, he said, his voice low and firm. Right now, a decision. Are you coming or are you staying? Staying meant safety. It meant his mother in the next room, the familiar comfort of his bed, the predictable misery of his school day. It meant a life defined by what he wasn't. Coming meant stepping off a cliff into an abyss of unknown dangers. It meant following a man who was more myth than reality into a world he had only ever observed from behind a screen. He looked at the poster on his wall, at the hooded figure who represented a sliver of hope in his quirkless world. And then he looked at the man standing in front of him, the living embodiment of that hope. There was no choice. There never had been. I'm coming, Izuku said, the words barely audible but imbued with a certainty that surprised even himself. A curt nod was Oliver's only reply. Good. We're not taking the front door. He moved to the window, sliding it open with a quiet efficiency that spoke of long practice. He paused on the fire escape, looking back. Your mother? She's a heavy sleeper. Izuku lied, his heart twisting with the first of what he knew would be many deceptions. She won't hear. Oliver held his gaze for a second longer, a silent acknowledgement of the sacrifice being made, then slipped out into the night. Izuku grabbed his yellow backpack, the same one he'd used as a projectile hours earlier, and scrambled after him, pulling the window shut with a soft click. The sound felt like a door closing on his entire childhood. The journey was a surreal dream. They descended the creaking fire escape and moved through the back alleys of the glades with a speed and silence that left Izuku breathless. Oliver moved like a phantom, his footsteps making no sound, his path weaving through the urban labyrinth, as if he had memorized every shadow. Izuku, clumsy and loud by comparison, stumbled to keep up. They emerged onto a deserted side street where a sleek, black motorcycle was parked, looking like a panther carved from obsidian. Oliver threw a helmet at him. Izuku fumbled it, his hands clumsy with adrenaline. Hold on tight, Oliver ordered, swinging a leg over the bike. The ride was a baptism by velocity. Star City blurred into a river of neon and concrete as Oliver gunned the engine. The glittering towers of the financial district, symbols of corporate power and wealth, rushed toward them. Izuku clung to Oliver's back, his face pressed against the cool leather of his jacket, his mind struggling to process the sheer surreality of the moment. He was on a motorcycle with Oliver Queen, racing through the city in the dead of night, leaving his old life further and further behind with every rotation of the wheels. They didn't stop at a fancy penthouse or a secluded mansion. Instead, Oliver pulled into the deserted underground parking garage of a towering, monolithic skyscraper bearing the iconic logo, Queen Consolidated. The air here was cool and sterile. Oliver killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. He led Izuku toward a section of the garage that was marked for executive parking. It looked utterly ordinary, but as they approached a blank, concrete wall, Oliver pressed his palm against a section that was indistinguishable from the rest. There was a faint, nearly inaudible click, and a section of the wall slid inward, revealing not a room, but a small, steel-paneled elevator. Izuku's jaw went slack. A hydraulic pressure plate activator disguised as a load-bearing wall section. The seam is less than a millimeter wide. That's brilliant. Oliver glanced at him, a flicker of something, amusement, maybe surprise, in his eyes. Get in. The elevator was a stark, windowless cube. As the doors hissed shut, plunging them into a soft, clinical light, Izuku felt a distinct sense of vertigo. There were no buttons, no floor indicators. Oliver placed his hand on another panel, and a soft blue light scanned his fingerprints, then his retina. Voice confirmation. A synthesized female voice stated, Queen Oliver, he said, his voice flat. Welcome, Mr. Queen. The elevator began to descend. And it didn't just descend, it plummeted. Izuku's stomach lurched, and he grabbed a railing for support. He could feel the immense speed, the pressure changing in his ears. Sub-level construction, he muttered, his analytical mind kicking in as a defense mechanism against the overwhelming awe and fear. We're going deep. Way below the city's foundation, below the subway lines, even the old sewer system. The power required for an elevator with this velocity, it would have to be on a completely independent grid, probably drawing from a geothermal source to avoid detection on the city's power matrix. The cost alone would be, "Breathe, kid," Oliver said, cutting through his rapid-fire analysis. The elevator slowed, its descent so smooth that the final stop was almost imperceptible. The doors hissed open, and Izuku Midoriya's world shattered and reassembled itself in an instant. He was standing on a metal platform overlooking a cavernous space that was part high-tech command center, part medieval armory, and part Olympic-level gymnasium. The air smelled of ozone from the electronics, cold steel, and the faint, coppery scent of sweat. The dominant sound was the low, steady hum of dozens of servers, a digital heartbeat for this hidden sanctuary. To his left was a massive bank of monitors, some displaying scrolling lines of code, others showing satellite maps of the city, police scanners, and encrypted communication channels. A woman with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail sat before them, her fingers a blur across 3 different keyboards. Wires and cables snaked from the consoles like metallic vines, feeding into a central server bank that pulsed with soft blue and green lights. To his right, the space was dominated by a vast training area. Sparring mats were laid out on the floor, next to racks of weights, gymnastic rings, and a series of pull-up bars set at staggered heights. And there, against the far wall, stood the salmon ladder. Izuku had only ever seen grainy footage of it, but seeing it in person, its rungs gleaming under the industrial lights, made his palms sweat. But it was the center of the room that stole his breath. Glass cases, illuminated from within, stood like sentinels. Inside them, mounted on black velvet, were arrows. Not just simple, pointed arrows, but an arsenal of technological marvels. Izuku's eyes widened as he recognized them from his notebooks. The bola arrow he had just analyzed. An arrow with a bulky, cylindrical head, an explosive charge. One with a microphone-like tip, a sonic dampener. Another with a complex, syringe-like apparatus, a tranquilizer delivery system. It was a library of tactical solutions, a testament to a brilliant and dangerous mind. And behind the arrow cases, on imposing black mannequins, were the suits. Different versions of the green arrow costume, each showing signs of wear and tear. One had a visible tear in the shoulder, crudely stitched up. Another had scorch marks across the chest. These weren't costumes, they were uniforms. They were the scarred skin of a long and brutal war. Incredible! Izuku breathed, his voice filled with a reverence that bordered on religious awe. This is the nerve center. The entire operation is run from here. The self-sustaining power, the secure comms network, the fabrication capabilities for the arsenal. The sheer logistical and financial resources required are astronomical. This is beyond pro-hero agency levels. This is a fortress. He talks a lot, doesn't he? The new voice, warm and laced with cheerful sarcasm, made Izuku jump. The woman at the computers had spun around in her chair. She wore thick-rimmed glasses, and a bright, intelligent smile lit up her face, a stark contrast to the grim intensity of the cave. "Felicity Smoke," she said, rolling her chair over to the platform. "You must be the kid who likes throwing his school supplies at bad guys. Nice to meet you. And for the record, it's not geothermal, it's a cold fusion microreactor. Much more efficient, though the containment field is a bit of a pain to recalibrate." Oliver grunted. "Felicity, this is Izuku Midoriya." "Izuku," Felicity repeated, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "So, what's your story? Secret quirk? Super genius IQ? Please tell me you're not another one of Oliver's brooding strays." "I am quirkless," Izuku stammered, his face flushing under her direct gaze. Felicity's smile didn't falter. If anything, it widened. "Good. That means you had to get smart instead." "I like smart." Her eyes fell to the soggy, ruined notebook still clutched in Izuku's hand. "What's that? Homework?" Before Izuku could answer, she gently took it from him. She flipped through the damp, warped pages, her expression shifting from curiosity to genuine astonishment. The ink was blurred, but the detailed schematics and dense, analytical notes were still partially legible. "Whoa!" she breathed, her fingers tracing a diagram of what looked like a miniature EMP device. Is this a breakdown of my own ghost signal algorithm? You reverse-engineered my cloaking protocol for the aerocomms from public domain police scanner chatter? She looked up at Izuku, her eyes wide behind her glasses. Okay. I am officially impressed, and a little creeped out. But mostly impressed. Oliver, he's a keeper. Izuku felt a surge of warmth. In the space of 30 seconds, this brilliant woman had seen and validated the part of him that everyone else, even himself at times, considered useless. The moment was broken by a third voice, one that was low, deep, and carried an undercurrent of profound skepticism. He's a child, Oliver. A large, powerfully built man emerged from the shadows near the training area. He was dressed in simple tactical pants, and a tight-fitting black shirt that stretched across a barrel chest. His arms were corded with muscle, and his face was a mask of stoic disapproval. He moved with the quiet confidence of a soldier, his gaze sweeping over Izuku, assessing him, and finding him wanting. John Diggle, Oliver said, his tone placating. This is the boy I told you about. Diggle stopped a few feet away, his arms crossed. He didn't look at Izuku as a person, he looked at him as a liability. I see that. What I don't see is what he's doing here. This isn't a game. We're not running a daycare for hero worshippers. The words were like a physical blow, extinguishing the small spark of pride Felicity's praise had ignited. This was the reaction Izuku was used to. The dismissal. The scorn. He has potential, Dig, Oliver said calmly. He has a death wish. Diggle countered, his voice a low growl. I've seen what this life does to trained soldiers, Oliver. To men who've been through hell and back. You want to bring a quirkless kid, a boy who probably hasn't even had to shave yet, into our war? What happens when he freezes? What happens when a villain with a real quirk decides to turn him into a red smear on the pavement? Who's going to be scraping him off the walls? You. Every word was a hammer blow of cold, hard reality. Izuku shrank under the weight of Diggle's stare, the man's fierce, protective loyalty to Oliver manifesting as a wall of hostility directed at him. That's enough, John, Oliver said, his voice dropping, taking on an edge of command that silenced the larger man. He turned his attention back to Izuku, his expression unreadable. He's not wrong. Let's not have any illusions about what this is. He gestured for Izuku to follow him, leading him past the computers and the armory to a small, cleared space with a simple metal table and a few chairs. It felt like an interrogation room. Oliver took a seat, the leather of his jacket creaking in the silence. Felicity and Diggle remained standing a short distance away, a jury of two. Sit, Oliver said. Izuku sat, his backpack slumping to the floor beside him. He felt small, insignificant, a child playing dress-up in a world of monsters. Oliver leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. He looked old in that moment, the lines on his face etched deeper by the harsh lighting of the cave. He looked tired. You see all this? He began, gesturing to the cave around them. The computers, the arrows, the training equipment. You see it as a hero's headquarters. It's not. It's a tomb. A place built on pain and loss. Every piece of equipment here was paid for with blood, sweat, or a piece of my soul. His eyes were like chips of flint, hard and unforgiving. Your notebooks are filled with analysis of heroes. You dream of saving people, of being a symbol. That's a noble dream, but it's not the reality of this life. The reality is crawling through filth, breaking bones, both yours and theirs, and making choices that will haunt you until the day you die. It's lying to everyone you care about to keep them safe. It's watching people die because you weren't fast enough, or strong enough, or smart enough. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a raw, intense whisper. I'm not offering you a quirk. I can't make you fly or lift a car. All I can offer you is pain. I will push you until you break. I will tear down the fanboy you are and see if there's a warrior underneath. I will teach you how to become a weapon. How to endure, how to fight, how to kill if you must. And the entire time, you will be one stray bullet, one misstep, 1 second of hesitation away from a very permanent end. He sat back, the intensity receding, replaced by a profound weariness. I'm doing this because I'm getting older, kid. I feel every punch, every fall, a little more than I did the year before. My mission, to save this city, has to outlive me. I see a spark in you. The same reckless, stubborn spark I had when I started. So I'm offering you a chance. Not to be a partner. Not to be a sidekick, but to be a student. To enter the crucible and see if you can be forged into something strong enough to one day carry this legacy. He fell silent. The hum of the servers filled the void. Izuku's mind reeled. This was a nightmare. This was everything opposite to the bright, shining ideal of heroism he had clung to his entire life. All might save people with a smile. This man was talking about saving people with broken bones and a broken spirit. He looked at Diggle, whose expression was grim, as if to say, see? This is the reality. Now run home. He looked at Felicity, whose face was filled with a sympathetic concern, a silent understanding of the crushing weight of Oliver's words. And then he looked at Oliver. He saw the scars, a faint white line tracing his jaw, another peeking out from the collar of his shirt. He saw the haunted look in his eyes, the look of a man who had seen the worst of humanity, and had chosen to fight it anyway. He thought of Bakugo's sneering face. You're a Deku. Useless. He thought of the doctor's pitying smile. You should probably give up. He thought of a lifetime of being told what he couldn't be. Oliver Queen wasn't telling him he couldn't do it. He was just telling him the cost. And for the first time, someone was being honest with him about what it would take. It would take everything. Izuku took a deep, shuddering breath, the first he felt he'd taken since entering the cave. He met Oliver's gaze, his own green eyes welling with terrified, determined tears. You said? I have the heart. Izuku began, his voice trembling but clear. And you said heart gets you killed. But it's the only thing I have. If you can teach me how to build the rest. If you can teach me how to make my heart strong enough to survive, then I accept. A long, heavy silence followed his declaration. Diggle sighed, a deep, resigned sound, and shook his head, but he said nothing. Felicity offered a small, watery, encouraging smile. Oliver simply nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. The deal was sealed. All right, he said, his voice back to its businesslike tone. He stood up, the chair scraping against the concrete floor. The moment of intense vulnerability was over. The commander was back. There's a cot and a basic lavatory in the back. You'll be staying here for the initial phase of your training. He walked over to Izuku and looked down at him, his shadow falling over the boy. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't offering a comforting hand. He was issuing a final, unbreakable command. The first thing you need to learn to save the city, Oliver said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space, is how to save yourself. Your old life, your dreams of flashy heroism, your weaknesses, you leave them all behind. Starting now. He turned and began to walk toward the training mats, his boots clicking with rhythmic finality on the floor. Training starts tomorrow at 5 a.m. He called back over his shoulder. Don't be late. Izuku was left alone at the table, the weight of his choice settling upon him like a physical shroud. He looked around the arrow cave, at the cold steel, the glowing screens, the shadowed corners. This was his new school. This was his new home. This was his chance. He was terrified. He was overwhelmed. But deep within the fear, buried beneath the crushing reality of it all, a tiny, unkillable ember of hope, the very same ember that had drawn him to Green Arrow in the first place, began to glow. He had a long, painful road ahead. But for the first time in his life, he was finally on a path. The first lesson of Izuku Midoriya's new life was pain. It was not the sharp, fleeting sting of a scraped knee or the dull throb of a bully's shove. This was a deeper, more elemental pain, a systemic agony that settled into his bones and screamed in every underused muscle fiber. It began at precisely 5 a.m. The next morning, when the harsh, industrial lights of the arrow cave flickered on, banishing the soft shadows where he had been fitfully sleeping on a narrow cot. He had barely slept, his mind a frantic kaleidoscope of the previous night's events. He had lain awake for hours, listening to the ceaseless hum of the servers, the only sound in the cavernous space. It felt less like a hero's lair and more like the belly of some great, sleeping beast. Before his eyes had even fully adjusted to the light, John Diggle was standing over him. He wasn't holding a cup of coffee or offering a morning greeting. He was holding a stopwatch, and his expression was as hard and unforgiving as the concrete floor. "On your feet, Midoriya!" Diggle's voice was a low rumble, devoid of any warmth. "Your education begins now." Thus began Izuku's introduction to what Diggle grimly referred to as conditioning. It was a euphemism. This was a systematic deconstruction of Izuku Midoriya, the boy, with the brutal intention of seeing if anything worth rebuilding was left in the wreckage. The day started with a run. Not in a park or on a track, but through the city's long-abandoned subway tunnels, a dark, sprawling network beneath the streets. The air was stale and heavy with the ghosts of a million commuters, the ground uneven with loose gravel and slick with condensation. Diggle set a relentless pace, a steady, powerful stride that Izuku, with his wiry, untrained frame, could not hope to match. Within 10 minutes, a fire had ignited in Izuku's lungs. His legs felt like leaden weights, his breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. He stumbled, his knee hitting the sharp edge of a rusted rail, and went down hard. Pain, white-hot and immediate, shot up his leg. Diggle didn't stop. He didn't even look back. "Pain is a signal," he called out, his voice echoing in the oppressive darkness. "It tells you where you're weak. Listen to it. Then ignore it. Get up." Gritting his teeth against the tears of pain and frustration that threatened to spill, Izuku pushed himself up. His knee was bleeding, a dark stain spreading on his cheap sweatpants. He limped for a few steps, then forced himself back into a lurching, agonizing jog, chasing Diggle's retreating shadow. This became the pattern of his mornings. He would run until he collapsed, get up, and run some more. After the tunnels, they would return to the cave for the true crucible, the physical training. Diggle was a master of a dozen different martial arts, a veteran of conflicts Izuku had only read about in history books. He moved with a brutal, compact efficiency, and he expected the same from Izuku. He started with the absolute basics: stance, footwork, a simple palm-heel strike. Izuku, a boy who had spent his life avoiding physical confrontation, was clumsy and uncoordinated. His movements were hesitant, his posture weak. "Wrong!" Diggle would bark, his voice a sharp crack. He would correct Izuku not with words, but with action. A swift leg sweep would send Izuku sprawling to the mat. A tap to an overextended elbow would elicit a jolt of pain. "Your guard is too wide. You're leaving your entire center line exposed. A child could drop you." Izuku would get up, his body a constellation of blooming bruises, and try again. And again. And again. He failed more times in a single hour than he had in his entire life. The mat became intimately familiar with the taste of his sweat and, on one occasion, the bitter tang of his own blood when he bit his tongue after a particularly hard fall. But the true altar of his suffering was the salmon ladder. It loomed in the training area like a medieval torture device. When Oliver had first demonstrated it, moving up the rungs with a fluid, explosive power that seemed to defy gravity, Izuku had been mesmerized. When it was his turn, it was a monument to his own inadequacy. He would hang from the bar, his hands raw and blistered, his muscles screaming in protest. He would pull, trying to generate the momentum needed to leap the bar up to the next set of rungs. He would get halfway, his body shaking with the strain, and then his strength would give out. He would fall back to the mat with a heavy, soul-crushing thud. Diggle would stand there, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Again, Izuku would drag himself to his feet, chalk his bleeding hands, and try again. He saw the skepticism in Diggle's eyes every single day. It was a silent, constant judgment. "You don't belong here. You're not strong enough. You're going to get Oliver killed." It was a more potent and painful motivator than any shouted insult. Every push-up, every sit-up, every failed attempt on that ladder was a desperate, unspoken plea. "Don't give up on me. Please. I can do this." He rarely saw Oliver during these morning sessions. He would hear him sometimes, the rhythmic thwack-thwack-thwack of arrows hitting a distant target, a constant reminder of the ultimate goal. But the mornings belonged to Diggle. The mornings were about breaking him down. The afternoons, however, belonged to Oliver. And they were a different kind of trial altogether. After a quick, protein-heavy lunch that Izuku was usually too exhausted to properly enjoy, his training would shift from the body to the mind, from brute force to absolute focus. Oliver would lead him to the far end of the cave, where a small, traditional archery range had been set up. The targets were simple circles, stark white against the dark gray of the padded wall. "Forget everything Diggle is teaching you," Oliver said during their first session, his voice a low, calm counterpoint to Diggle's abrasive bark. He handed Izuku a simple, lightweight training bow, its draw weight just manageable for his untrained arms. "Physical strength is a component, but it's not the foundation. Archery is not an act of force, it's an act of will." He taught Izuku the fundamentals, the zen of the craft. The stance, feet shoulder-width apart, grounded and stable. The grip, light and relaxed, letting the bow rest in his hand rather than being strangled by it. The anchor point, drawing the string back to the same spot on his chin every single time, until the motion became an extension of his own body. And the breathing. Everything came back to the breathing. "Breathe in as you draw," Oliver instructed, his voice a quiet murmur behind him. "Hold at the peak of your draw, in that space between breaths. That is where you find stillness. The city is loud, combat is chaos. But in that single moment, the world must go silent. There is only you, the bow, the arrow, and the target. Breathe out as you release." It sounded simple. It was maddeningly difficult. Izuku's analytical mind, his greatest asset in every other area of his life, became his greatest enemy. He overthought everything. He calculated the angle, obsessed over the wind resistance in the cave, tried to mentally blueprint the perfect shot. His first arrows were wild. They clattered against the wall, they wobbled in the air, they buried themselves in the padding a foot away from the target. Each failure was a fresh wave of frustration. "You are trying to force the arrow to the target," Oliver said, his patience seemingly infinite. "You are aiming with your eyes. You must learn to aim with your spirit. The bow is an extension of your will. You don't aim the arrow, you become the arrow." He had Izuku practice for hours with his eyes closed, focusing only on the feel of the draw, the rhythm of his breath, the subtle tension in the string. He had him practice drawing and holding for minutes at a time, until his arms shook and his shoulders burned, teaching him muscle memory through sheer, grueling repetition. Weeks turned into a month. The bruises from his mornings with Diggle faded and were replaced by new ones. The calluses on his hands grew thick and tough. He started to anticipate Diggle's corrections, his body learning the language of combat through pain and failure. He could now do 12 consecutive pull-ups, a feat that would have been unthinkable a month prior. And then, one afternoon, it happened. He was exhausted. His session with Diggle had been particularly brutal, focusing on disarming techniques that had left his wrists aching. He was standing at the range, his body screaming for rest, his mind a dull, throbbing blank. He knocked an arrow, his movements slow, automatic. He drew the string back, his anchor point settling into place. He breathed in. The usual cacophony of self-doubt and analytical chatter in his head was quiet. For the first time, there was only the sound of his own breathing, the faint creak of the bowstring. He held the breath, finding the stillness Oliver had spoken of. He didn't aim. He just let go. The release was clean, a crisp snap of the string. The arrow flew with a soft hiss. Thwack. The sound was different. It wasn't the dull thud of the padding or the clatter of a miss. It was a solid, centered, perfect sound. Izuku opened his eyes. There, in the dead center of the target, quivering slightly from the force of the impact, was his arrow. A perfect bullseye. A slow, wide grin spread across his face, a genuine, unforced expression of pure joy. He had done it. He looked over at Oliver, who was leaning against the workbench, observing him. The older man didn't smile, but there was a flicker of approval in his eyes, a subtle nod that was worth more to Izuku than 1,000 words of praise. It was a major emotional moment, a tiny point of light in a long, dark tunnel. He had taken his first real step. His evenings were spent with Felicity. And where the mornings and afternoons were a trial by fire for his body, the evenings were a feast for his mind. After cleaning up and eating, Izuku would pull a chair up beside Felicity at her bank of monitors. She became his window to the outside world, a world he was now completely disconnected from. He hadn't spoken to his mother in a month, Oliver having arranged a cover story about an intensive, all-expenses-paid STEM summer camp for gifted students. The lie was a constant, bitter taste in his mouth, but he knew it was necessary. Felicity treated him not as a child or a project, but as a colleague. She saw the voracious, analytical engine of his mind, and instead of being intimidated or dismissive, she was delighted. "Okay, so," she would say, her fingers flying across the keyboard, bringing up lines of code. "The SCPD's new encryption is a real piece of work. They're using a dynamic quantum-resistant algorithm that rekeys every 60 seconds. It's beautiful, really. And a total pain in my butt. What do you see?" And Izuku, his mind a welcome refuge from his aching body, would dive in. He would absorb the information, his brain finding patterns, exploiting logical loopholes, and suggesting approaches Felicity hadn't considered. "The rekeying isn't truly random," he'd mutter, pointing at a section of the code. "It's pseudo-random, based on an atmospheric particle sensor on the roof of the precinct. If we can get access to that data feed, or even spoof it, we can predict the next key sequence with about a 92% probability." Felicity's eyes would light up behind her glasses. "Izuku Midoriya, you magnificent little nerd. That's brilliant." She taught him about the city's digital infrastructure, about hacking, surveillance, and data mining. She showed him how Team Arrow used predictive algorithms, fed by crime statistics, social media chatter, and a network of hidden cameras, to anticipate criminal activity. It was here, in this world of pure data and logic, that Izuku felt truly at home. He felt useful. His notebooks, once filled with hero trivia, were now filled with complex code, network schematics, and tactical plans. He started a new volume, Volume 14, but this one was different. It wasn't about worship, it was about application. One evening, while Oliver was out on patrol, an alert pinged on one of Felicity's monitors. A small-time gang, the Trident crew, known for smuggling contraband through the city's industrial canals, was becoming more aggressive. They had recently acquired military-grade hardware, making them a priority target. "Okay, Oliver's in the area, but he's flying blind," Felicity said, her expression tense as she monitored his progress. "The Tridents use the old canal maintenance tunnels. They're a maze, and they're not on any official city map." "Wait," Izuku said, his eyes glued to a satellite image of the canal district. He pulled up his own project, something he'd been working on in his spare time, a composite map of Star City, overlaying official blueprints with historical records, urban exploration forums, and even declassified civil engineering reports from the 1950s. "Here," he said, his finger tracing a faint line on his screen. "There's an old, decommissioned storm drain that intersects with the main canal tunnel right here. According to the original plans, there should be a service hatch. It's a perfect ambush point." He began cross-referencing patrol schedules he'd been secretly compiling. "The main Trident patrol passes that intersection every 27 minutes. Oliver has a 4-minute window to get in, plant a tracker on their main supply crate, and get out undetected." Felicity's fingers flew, verifying his data. Her eyebrows shot up. "The kid's right," she said into her headset. "Oliver, I'm sending you new coordinates. Your new best friend just found you a front door." Izuku held his breath, listening to the tense silence, punctuated only by Felicity's occasional updates. He watched a blinking green dot, Oliver, move across the map, following the path he had laid out. Minutes felt like hours. "Tracker is planted." Oliver's distorted voice finally crackled through the comms. "Clean and clear. No hostiles sighted. Overwatch, where did you get this intel?" Felicity leaned back in her chair, a wide, proud grin spreading across her face. She looked at Izuku and tapped her headset. "Let's just say we have a new analyst on the payroll. He's got a knack for finding patterns." In the background, Diggle, who had been cleaning a rifle at a nearby workbench, looked over. He didn't smile, but he gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but for Izuku, it felt like a mountain had moved. It wasn't praise. It was acknowledgement, a sliver of respect, earned not through brute force, but through the power of his own mind. The first month bled into the second. The rhythms of the cave became Izuku's new reality. The pain of the morning, the focus of the afternoon, the intellectual stimulation of the evening. He was changing. The change was slow, incremental, carved into him one painful lesson at a time. He was still skinny, but the soft, Undefined lines of his body were hardening into lean muscle. His posture was straighter, his movements more certain. The constant hesitation in his voice was fading, replaced by a quiet confidence, especially when he was in his element with Felicity. He could now climb the salmon ladder. Not with Oliver's effortless grace, but with a grunting, straining determination, he could make it to the top. The first time he did, he hung there, his arms shaking, his entire body screaming, and looked down at Diggle. The big man was watching him, and for the first time, the skepticism in his eyes had been replaced by something else. It looked like grudging approval. Not bad, Diggle had grunted, before turning away. Now get down and give me 50. The words were harsh, but the meaning was clear. Izuku had passed some invisible test. He was no longer just a liability. He was a recruit. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Izuku sat alone in the armory section, carefully cleaning and oiling a training bow. His hands, once soft and ink-stained, were now a geography of his training, calloused, scarred, and strong. Oliver approached him, walking with his usual silent tread. He didn't say anything for a long moment, simply watching Izuku work. You're learning, Oliver finally said. It wasn't a question. Izuku looked up, surprised. I'm trying. Diggle says you don't quit, Oliver continued, leaning against the display case. Felicity says you're the smartest person in the room. I say, you're still a long way from ready. Izuku's face fell slightly, but he nodded. I know, but, Oliver added, pushing himself off the case. You're no longer the boy who stumbled into my city. You've survived the fire. Now, it's time to see if you can be forged. He gestured for Izuku to follow him. He led him past the training mats, past the computers, to the central display, to the glass cases holding the suits. He stopped in front of the oldest one, a simple, dark green leather uniform. This is more than a mission, Izuku, Oliver said, his voice low and serious, his reflection a ghostly image on the glass next to Izuku's. It's a legacy. A promise, to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. To be the arrow of justice in a city drowning in darkness. He looked at Izuku, his gaze heavy with the weight of years of battle. You've proven you have the will. You've proven you have the mind. And you're starting to build the body. Soon, very soon, we're going to have to see what you do when the pain is real, when the target is shooting back, and when a life is on the line. Izuku looked at his own reflection in the glass. He saw the tired eyes, the new lines of muscle on his neck, the hardened set of his jaw. He didn't see the same useless, tearful boy who had stood in his bedroom just 2 months ago. He saw a stranger. He saw a survivor. The crucible wasn't over. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the worst was yet to come. But for the first time, he truly believed he could withstand the heat. The Arrow Cave had become Izuku's entire world, a hermetically sealed universe of pain, focus, and data. The city above was an abstraction, a series of glowing maps and crackling police comms that he engaged with from a sterile, safe distance. He had analyzed its criminal ecosystems, memorized its architectural blueprints, and studied its darkest corners, but he hadn't set foot in it for 3 months. He was a master cartographer who had never seen the sea. That was about to change. The mission briefing was clipped and efficient, delivered by Oliver in front of the main bank of monitors. The subject was a new player on the Star City arms scene, a man known only by the street name Scrapnel. He wasn't a metahuman, not a kingpin, just an ambitious and dangerously clever black marketeer. Scrapnel's specialty is repurposing advanced technology, Oliver explained, pointing to a grainy surveillance photo on the screen. It showed a crate being loaded into an unmarked van. He gets his hands on salvaged parts from downed military drones, damaged LexCorp security bots, even wreckage from metahuman battles. He then retrofits them into high-impact, untraceable weaponry and sells them to street gangs. He's democratizing destruction, Felicity added grimly from her console. The Goliaths in the East End just got their hands on a shipment of shoulder-mounted plasma casters, low yield, but they can punch through a standard police cruiser. SCPD is outgunned and terrified. Izuku's eyes were glued to the screen, his mind already racing, processing the data. His supply chain must be decentralized. Small workshops, mobile repair units. Hard to track. but his distribution has to have a choke point. A central meeting point for high-value sales. Exactly, Oliver said, giving Izuku an approving glance. Felicity tracked a series of encrypted cash transfers to a shell corporation that owns a derelict shipyard in the industrial district. Tonight, Scrapnel is meeting with the leaders of the Serpent Kings to offload a major shipment. We believe it includes a prototype kinetic pulse rifle. Diggle, who was methodically checking the tension on Oliver's bowstring, grunted. A pulse rifle in the hands of those psychos? That's a game-changer. They could hold a whole city block hostage with that kind of firepower. The objective is not direct engagement, Oliver stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. This is an intel-gathering mission. I go in, plant a micro-tracker on the primary weapons crate, and I get out. We follow the crate back to Scrapnel's main workshop, then we dismantle his entire operation from the top down. He turned, and his gaze settled on Izuku. The air in the cave, usually filled with the hum of servers and the clank of weights, went utterly still. And you'll be providing tactical support, Oliver said. Izuku's blood ran cold. He stared, speechless. He had assumed, as he always did, that his role would be confined to the cave, to the safe, digital world of maps and comms. He looked at Diggle, expecting a vehement protest, a flat-out refusal. But the big man just continued his work, his expression unreadable. He looked at Felicity, who gave him a small, encouraging smile. Me? Izuku finally managed to squeak out, his voice sounding embarrassingly high. In the field? Not in the field, Oliver corrected, his voice firm. On the field. You'll be on comms. Overwatch 2. You'll be my eyes and ears from a secure location. Felicity will handle the primary hack and trace, but you will be my direct line. You know the blueprints of that shipyard better than the men who built it. You'll monitor sight lines, track movement, and call out any anomalies. This is the next phase of your training, applying your analysis under pressure. The fear that had initially seized him was slowly replaced by a thrumming, nervous energy. It wasn't a combat role. It was a support role. It was an extension of what he was already doing, but with real-time, life-or-death stakes. He could do this. He had to do this. What's my call sign? Izuku asked, his voice steadier now. Oliver paused, considering. Felicity is Overwatch. What do you want to be called? Izuku thought for a moment. He thought of the schoolyard, the explosive sneer, the name that had been branded onto his soul as a mark of uselessness. He thought of how, in this cave, he had slowly begun to claw back his own self-worth, turning his perceived weaknesses into strengths. It was time to reclaim the word, to strip it of its power to harm him and forge it into a shield. Deku, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Call me Deku. Diggle looked up, a questioning frown on his face. Oliver simply nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. All right, Deku. Suit up. Suit up was a generous term. His suit was a set of lightweight, dark gray tactical pants, a reinforced long-sleeved shirt, and a simple black hoodie. It was civilian clothing, chosen to blend in, to not draw attention. But as he pulled on the combat boots Diggle provided, the same kind Oliver wore, it felt more significant than any costume. He was given a lightweight satchel containing a military-grade tablet, a powerful pair of binoculars, and a compact comms unit that fit snugly in his ear. His perch was a rooftop on a long-abandoned cannery building, 3 blocks away from the shipyard. Diggle had driven him there in an unmarked van, the ride thick with a tense, professional silence. As they climbed the rusted fire escape to the roof, Diggle finally spoke. Listen to me, kid, he said, his voice a low growl. He grabbed Izuku's shoulder, his grip firm, forcing the boy to look at him. Out here, there are no resets. There are no do-overs. What you say into that comm, Oliver will treat as gospel. A wrong call, a moment of hesitation, and you could be sending him into a bullet. Do you understand the weight of that? Izuku swallowed, the dry taste of fear in his mouth. I understand. No, you don't, Diggle said, his voice raw. Not yet. But you will. Stay focused. Report what you see, only what you see. No theories, no analysis, just facts. Eyes open, mouth shut unless you have something vital to report. I'll be parked 2 streets over, monitoring police channels. You get into any trouble, you key the emergency channel twice. Got it, got it, Izuku repeated, his heart hammering against his ribs. Diggle gave his shoulder a final, hard squeeze. Don't get him killed, Midoriya. Then he was gone, a shadow melting back down the fire escape, leaving Izuku alone on the rooftop. The wind was cold, whipping around the crumbling brickwork, carrying the scent of salt and rust from the nearby docks. The city, which had always felt so distant from the safety of the cave, was now a vast, breathing, dangerous entity all around him. He felt terrifyingly small and exposed. He moved to the edge of the roof, lying flat on his stomach behind a low parapet, the gritty surface cold against his body. He raised the binoculars. The shipyard came into sharp focus. It was a graveyard of industrial ambition. Rusted cranes stood like skeletal dinosaurs against the bruised purple of the night sky. Corrugated steel warehouses, their walls bleeding rust, were arranged in a chaotic maze. Deku, are you in position? Oliver's distorted voice crackled in his ear, making him jump. Izuku fumbled with the comms unit, his fingers suddenly clumsy. Why yes. In position. I have a clear line of sight on Warehouse Gamma, the designated meeting point. Good, came the reply. Overwatch, are we clear? All local security cameras are on a loop. Felicity's cheerful voice replied, a comforting link back to the safety of the cave. And I'm scrubbing police dispatch for any calls to this sector. You're a ghost. Have fun, boys. Izuku watched through his binoculars as a dark figure detached itself from the shadows near the shipyard's perimeter fence. Green Arrow. He moved with a fluid grace that was almost inhuman, a predator in his natural environment. He scaled the fence with silent ease and melted into the labyrinth of shipping containers and derelict machinery. I'm inside, Oliver reported. Deku, talk to me. What's the layout? This was it. Izuku took a deep breath, pushing down the tremor in his hands. He called up the blueprints on his tablet, his mind shifting into the familiar, comfortable space of analysis. Okay, he began, his voice gaining confidence as he focused on the task. Warehouse Gamma is a single-level structure, 3 main entrances, a large bay door on the west side, facing the water, and 2 smaller personnel doors on the north and south. Based on my thermal scan, there are 4 heat signatures inside. Stationary. They're waiting. Patrols? 2-man patrols circling the exterior of the warehouse. Standard clockwise pattern. They just passed the southwest corner. You have a 90-second window before they round the building again. Copy that. I'm heading for the roof access hatch on the east side. Is it clear? Izuku scanned the roof. Affirmative. The hatch is clear. No external sensors detected. He watched as Green Arrow scaled the warehouse with his grappling hook, a silent, ascending shadow. The next few minutes were a masterclass in stealth. Izuku guided him, calling out the patrol's position, giving him the all-clear to drop into the warehouse through the hatch. I'm in the rafters, Oliver whispered. I have eyes on the package. It's a large, military-grade hard case. Right in the center of the room. For hostiles, armed with assault rifles, Serpent Kings, judging by their tattoos. Can you make the shot from there? Izuku asked, his eyes scanning the warehouse perimeter, his gaze never resting in one place for more than a second. Negative. Too much crossfire potential if things go south. I need to get closer. The primary target is the crate. There's a gantry crane that runs the length of the ceiling, Izuku said, tracing the structure on his blueprints. It should provide cover. You can follow it to the east wall, then drop down behind that stack of oil drums. The operation was proceeding flawlessly. It was like a training simulation, a complex problem set that he and Oliver were solving in perfect sync. Izuku felt a surge of pride, a sense of belonging. He was part of this. He was helping. And that's when everything went wrong. Hold! Oliver's voice was a sudden, tense hiss. We've got incoming. Izuku snapped his binoculars back to the main gate of the shipyard. 2 black sedans, their headlights off, rolled silently into the compound. They weren't Scrapnel's usual beat-up cargo vans. These were sleek, armored, professional. Oliver, I have 2 unidentified vehicles entering the shipyard, Izuku reported, his voice tight. They don't match Scrapnel's known associates. How many? 8 men are getting out. They're armed. Body armor, tactical gear. This isn't a street gang. They look like mercenaries. Inside the warehouse, the Serpent Kings tensed, raising their rifles. This wasn't their buyer. Overwatch, run their plates. Oliver commanded. Already on it. Felicity replied, her voice losing its usual cheerfulness. Plates are cloned. These guys are professionals. No ideas. The mercenary team spread out, their movements disciplined and coordinated. They weren't storming the warehouse. They were surrounding it. This is a trap. Izuku breathed, his heart sinking. The deal was a setup, or a double cross. Oliver countered. Scrapnel might have sold the location to a higher bidder. Deku, find me a way out. The south door. Izuku's eyes flew to the south entrance. 2 of the mercs were taking up positions on either side of it. Negative, south door is covered. North door as well. The bay door? They have a man with a heavy machine gun setting up on a container overlooking the bay. You go out that door, you're cut to pieces before you take 3 steps. The roof hatch? They'll be expecting it. It's a bottleneck. A fatal funnel. The cool, analytical part of Izuku's brain was being drowned out by a rising tide of panic. Every exit was a death trap. He was the eyes, the strategist, and he had led his mentor into a perfectly sealed box. Diggle's words echoed in his head, "Don't get him killed, Midoriya." Suddenly, the night erupted. The mercenaries didn't bother with a subtle entry. They blew the north and south doors off their hinges with shaped charges. The sound of the explosions was a physical blow, even from 3 blocks away. Gunfire followed immediately, the sharp crackle of assault rifles and the heavier thump-thump of the Serpent King's weapons. Contact! Contact! Oliver yelled into the calm. They're engaging the Serpent Kings! It's a slaughter! Oliver, you have to get out of there! Felicity's voice was frantic. Izuku watched in horror through his binoculars. He could see muzzle flashes lighting up the grimy windows of the warehouse. The firefight was brutal and short. The Serpent Kings were outclassed, their wild firing no match for the disciplined volleys of the mercenaries. One by one, their heat signatures on Izuku's tablet winked out. Serpents are down. Oliver reported, his voice tight with tension. The mercs are sweeping the warehouse. They're not here for the weapons. They're looking for me. Who are these guys? Izuku asked, his voice trembling. Doesn't matter. They've cut comms. Overwatch, you still there? Oliver's voice was suddenly tinny, breaking up. Liver cutting through firewall. Felicity's voice dissolved into a burst of static. Felicity? Diggle? Izuku cried into his own calm, but the line was dead. A high-pitched squeal was his only reply. They had a military-grade ECM jammer. He was cut off. He was alone, and Green Arrow was trapped in a warehouse with a team of 8 professional killers. Panic, cold and absolute, seized Izuku. This was it. This was the moment Diggle had warned him about. The moment he would freeze. His mind was a maelstrom of failure. He had failed. He had led Oliver into a trap, and now he was going to die, and it would be his fault. He could feel tears welling in his eyes, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He was just a kid on a roof, a useless Deku. Breathe. Oliver's voice, calm and patient from one of their first archery lessons, cut through the panic. Find the stillness. The world must go silent. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, forcing down the terror. He took one deep, ragged breath. Then another. He wasn't the boy on the mat anymore. He was the analyst. He was Overwatch too. He had a job to do. He opened his eyes. The panic had receded, replaced by a cold, desperate clarity. He couldn't talk to Oliver. But Oliver had a mission. Survive. Escape. And he, Izuku, had the map. His comm was jammed, but his tablet was on a closed, hard-wired network with his satchel. His local systems were still active. He pulled up the city blueprints, his fingers flying across the screen. Not the electrical grid, not the water mains. The sewer system. The old, forgotten underbelly of the city. He cross-referenced the shipyard's original construction plans from the 1920s with the city's sanitation grid. And there it was, A tiny, insignificant detail he had noted during his initial research, but had dismissed as irrelevant. An old, bricked-over maintenance drain, located in the floor of Warehouse Gamma's secondary cold storage unit. It connected to a primary sewer conduit that ran directly under the main road, 2 blocks north. It was a long shot. It might be sealed, collapsed, or flooded. But it was the only shot they had. But how to tell Oliver? He couldn't speak to him. He had to show him. He looked at his satchel. Binoculars. Tablet. And a standard issue, high-intensity laser pointer Diggle had included for signaling purposes. His mind raced, formulating a plan. It was insane. It was reckless. It was the kind of stupid, low-probability gambit he had pulled with his backpack outside the convenience store. But it was all he had. He couldn't communicate with Oliver, but he could communicate at him. He just had to get his attention. Inside the warehouse, Oliver Queen was fighting for his life. He moved through the rafters like a wraith, a whisper of green and black against the dark steel. He had taken out 2 of the mercenaries already, one with a silent arrow to the throat, the other with a brutal takedown that ended with a snapped neck. But there were still 6 left, and they were methodical, sweeping the warehouse in pairs, their movements a deadly, practiced dance. He was pinned down behind a large piece of machinery, the air around him sizzling with incoming fire. His calm was dead. He was blind, cut off from his team. He was weighing his options, and none of them were good. He could try to fight his way out, but it was a suicide run. He could try to hide, but they would eventually flush him out. That's when he saw it. A tiny, brilliant red dot appeared on the wall opposite him. It danced for a second, then held steady. Oliver froze. What was it? A sniper's laser sight? No. It wasn't a targeting laser. It was a signal. It was coming from outside, from the direction of the old cannery. Deku. The red dot moved. It wasn't random. It was tracing a line. It moved from Oliver's position, across the floor, and stopped on the door to a small, windowless room in the corner of the warehouse, the cold storage unit. Oliver's eyes widened in understanding. The kid was thinking. He was off comms, but he wasn't out of the fight. He was guiding him. It was a desperate, crazy plan, but it was a plan. Getting there was the problem. The floor between his position and the cold storage was a kill zone. On the roof, Izuku watched as 2 mechs closed in on Oliver's position. He had to create a diversion. A real one. Something loud. He scanned his surroundings, his eyes landing on a large, rusted electrical transformer on the roof of the adjacent building. It was old, probably decommissioned, but the power cables leading to it looked thick and heavy. He had no explosives. He had no weapons. He had his satchel, his tablet, and his binoculars. And he had a rock. He scrambled across the roof, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He found a loose piece of brick, heavy and solid in his hand. He looked at the transformer. It was 20 meters away, across an alley. He couldn't throw it that far, not with any accuracy. But below the transformer, hanging precariously from the side of the building, was a tangle of old, frayed wires and a broken metal conduit. It was the same principle as the scaffolding. A structural weak point. He didn't have time to calculate. He just acted. He took a running start, and hurled the brick with every ounce of strength he possessed. It sailed through the air, end over end, and smashed into the rusted conduit. The result was spectacular. The conduit shattered, and the heavy transformer, its last support gone, tore free from its moorings. It fell 3 stories with a deafening screech of tortured metal and exploded on the pavement below in a brilliant, apocalyptic shower of blue and white sparks. Every mercenary in and around the warehouse flinched, their attention drawn to the sudden, violent chaos outside. For Oliver, it was the opening he needed. He burst from cover, a green blur of motion. He fired 2 arrows in quick succession, dropping the 2 mercs who had been closing in on him. He didn't wait to see them fall. He sprinted across the open floor, diving behind a stack of crates as the remaining soldiers opened fire, their bullets chewing through the wood around him. He was closer to the cold storage, but still exposed. On the roof, Izuku saw Oliver was pinned down again. The diversion had worked, but it hadn't been enough. He needed another one. He was out of options. There was nothing else to throw, nothing else to break. Wait. There was one thing. Himself. He looked down at the street. It was a 4-story drop. A fall would kill him, but next to his building, running down the alley, was a massive, canvas advertising banner, stretched taut between his building and the next. It was old and weathered, depicting a smiling model advertising a brand of soda that hadn't been sold in a decade. It was wide. It was angled. It probably wouldn't hold. But it might. It might slow his fall enough. This was beyond stupid. This was insane. But Oliver was going to die. The first thing you need to save this city is to save yourself. Oliver's words echoed in his mind. But what if saving himself wasn't the most important thing? What if saving his mentor, the man who had given him a chance, was? He didn't have time to second guess. He stood up, in full view of the street below. Hey! He screamed, his voice raw and cracking with terror and adrenaline. Over here, you bastards! One of the mercenaries outside the warehouse, the one with the heavy machine gun, looked up. His eyes widened in surprise as he saw the lone figure on the rooftop. He swung his weapon around. Izuku ran. He ran straight for the edge of the roof and, without allowing himself a moment to think, he leaped. For a terrifying second, he was airborne, the wind roaring in his ears, the hard, unforgiving pavement rushing up to meet him. He hit the canvas banner with a jarring, full-body impact that knocked the wind out of him. The old material groaned, tore, and for a horrible moment, he thought it would give way completely. But it held just long enough, acting like a crude, angled slide. He tumbled down its length, the rough canvas scraping him raw, before being unceremoniously dumped into a large, overflowing garbage dumpster in the alley below. The landing was a jarring explosion of pain. His head hit something hard, and his vision swam with black spots. But he was alive, and more importantly, every mercenary outside the warehouse was now focused on the dumpster in the alley, their attention completely diverted. Inside, Oliver saw his chance. The hail of bullets stopped as the mercs outside shouted, trying to figure out what had just happened. He broke cover and sprinted the final 10 meters to the cold storage unit, kicking the door open and diving inside just as the firing resumed. He was safe. For now. He found the old drain cover exactly where the laser had indicated. It was heavy, sealed with rust, but with a grunt of effort, he pried it open, revealing a dark, foul-smelling tunnel. He gave one last look back at the warehouse, a silent thank you to the insane, brilliant, reckless boy who had just saved his life, and descended into the darkness. Izuku crawled out of the dumpster, his body a symphony of agony. His arm was definitely broken, a sharp, grinding pain radiating from his wrist. His head was bleeding. But he was moving. Adrenaline was afire in his veins. He had to get out of there. He stumbled out of the alley just as Diggle's unmarked van screeched to a halt in front of him. The side door flew open, and Diggle hauled him inside, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "What in the hell was that?" he roared, peeling away from the curb just as the mercenaries rounded the corner. "Are you out of your mind? Keying the emergency channel and then jumping off a roof?" Izuku couldn't answer. The adrenaline was fading, and the world was starting to go gray around the edges. He slumped against the seat, his broken arm cradled to his chest. "He's safe," Izuku whispered, his voice weak. "I got him out." The sewer, his vision tunneled, and the roar in his ears drowned out Diggle's furious shouting. The last thing he saw before he blacked out was the genuine, unadulterated shock and concern on John Diggle's face. The world returned to Izuku Midoriya in pieces. First came the low, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor, a sound he recognized from 100 hospital dramas. Next was the dull, throbbing ache that seemed to emanate from every part of his body, a painful testament to his impromptu flight. Finally, there was the scent, antiseptic and sterile, the unmistakable smell of the Aerocave's advanced medbay. He cracked his eyes open, a groan escaping his lips. The bright, clinical light of the medbay was blinding. He was lying on a cot, and 4 drip in his good arm. His left arm was encased in a sleek, black cast, a high-tech polymer brace that was already humming softly, emitting a low-frequency pulse to accelerate bone regeneration. There were 17 stitches closing a gash on his forehead. "Don't try to move," the voice was John Diggle's. It was low and gruff, but it lacked its usual edge of hostility. Izuku turned his head slowly, wincing at the pull of the stitches. Diggle was sitting in a chair beside the cot, his large frame looking out of place amidst the sterile medical equipment. He wasn't angry. He looked exhausted. "You've been out for about 6 hours," Diggle continued, his gaze fixed on the heart monitor. "You have a compound fracture in your left ulna, a severe concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and more bruises than I can count. Felicity says you landed in the only dumpster in that alley that was full of cardboard instead of construction debris. The doctors are calling it a miracle. I'm calling it damned fool luck." "Oliver?" Izuku rasped, his throat dry. He's fine." Diggle cut him off, finally looking at him. The expression in his eyes was complex, a mixture of residual anger, grudging respect, and something that looked unnervingly like concern. "He made it to the sewer conduit, just like you planned. Popped a manhole cover a mile away and called for evac. He's debriefing with Felicity now." Izuku sagged back into the cot, a wave of profound relief washing over him, so potent it almost made him dizzy. "The mission, we failed. We survived," Diggle corrected, his voice flat. "In this line of work, that's a win. The mercenaries cleaned the site and vanished before SCPD even established a perimeter. The weapons are gone. Scrapnel is in the wind. But Oliver is alive." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. "That was the stupidest, most reckless, most suicidally insane thing I have ever seen a human being do. And I've seen Oliver try to outstubborn a shark." He paused, and Izuku braced himself for the lecture, for the "I told you so." "But it didn't come. It was also," Diggle continued, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone, "one of the bravest. You had no training for that scenario. No weapons. No support. You were cut off and alone, and you used the only tools you had, your brain and your body, to save your commanding officer. You put his life ahead of your own. Soldiers train for years to be able to make a call like that. You just did it." He stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. "Get some rest, Midoriya. The pain meds are going to keep you fuzzy for a while." He walked to the door of the med bay, then stopped, his back still to Izuku. "And for what it's worth, you did good." He left without another word. Izuku stared at the empty doorway, the simple, gruff words of praise echoing in the quiet room. It was the first time Diggle had ever given him an unconditional compliment. It felt more healing than any of the advanced medical tech humming around him. He had faced the fire, and he hadn't frozen. He had acted. He had made a difference. The pain was immense, but for the first time since he had entered this cave, he felt like he might actually belong here. He drifted back into a drug-induced sleep, the rhythmic beep of the monitor a comforting lullaby. 2 weeks later, the cast was off. The ribs were healing, and Izuku was back on the training mats. The experience in the field had changed something in him, and it had changed how the team saw him. The skepticism in Diggle's eyes was gone, replaced by a watchful, demanding respect. He pushed Izuku harder than ever, but now it felt less like he was trying to break him and more like he was trying to build him. Felicity fussed over him like a mother hen, constantly checking his concussion symptoms while simultaneously throwing complex encryption problems at him. Her way of showing affection. And Oliver. Oliver was different. The mentor-student dynamic was still there, but it was now underpinned by a new, unspoken bond. The bond between two soldiers who had survived a firefight together. "Your actions at the shipyard were reckless and nearly got you killed," Oliver said, standing opposite him in the sparring circle. "You defied a direct order to stay put and observe." "You didn't give that order," Izuku countered, settling into a low defensive stance. "It was implicit in the mission parameters." Oliver shot back, circling him like a panther. "But your improvisation was successful. You adapted to a compromised situation and achieved the primary objective. The primary objective was to plant a tracker, which we failed to do. The primary objective is always to come home alive," Oliver said, and in that instant he lunged. His attack was a blur of motion. Izuku reacted on instinct, just as Diggle had drilled into him. He parried the first blow, sidestepped the second, but Oliver's leg swept out, catching his ankle and sending him tumbling to the mat. Before he could recover, Oliver was on him, a forearm pressed against his throat. You're getting faster. Oliver grunted, the pressure on Izuku's windpipe just enough to be a serious threat. Your defensive instincts are improving. But you're still thinking 2 moves ahead. I'm thinking 10. You react? I anticipate. That's the difference between a survivor and a warrior. He released Izuku and offered a hand, pulling him to his feet. Again, life in the cave settled into this new, intense rhythm. But while Izuku was being forged in the crucible below, the city above was beginning to curdle. A new name was being whispered on the streets, a name spoken with a mixture of fear and awe. He called himself Overturn. His debut was not subtle. He didn't start with back-alley muggings or quiet extortion rackets. He announced his arrival by walking into the middle of a televised standoff between the police and a group of heavily armed bank robbers. The police had the building surrounded. The pro-hero, Death Arms, was on the scene, preparing to breach the entrance. Then, a lone figure had walked calmly through the police cordon, ignoring the shouted commands to stop. He was tall and lean, dressed in a stylish, almost theatrical long coat of dark gray, with silver accents that glinted under the news helicopter's spotlights. He wore no mask, his face open for all to see. He had sharp, aristocratic features, slicked back black hair, and eyes that burned with an unnerving, zealous intensity. As the police moved to intercept him, he simply raised a hand. The 2 officers charging him froze in mid-stride, their bodies locked in place, before being violently hurled backward, smashing into their own squad car with enough force to shatter the windows. Death Arms, a hero known for his immense physical strength, charged him, bellowing a challenge. Overturn didn't flinch. He met the hero's charge with an outstretched palm. A split second before Death Arms' powerful fist could connect, it stopped dead, inches from Overturn's face, as if it had hit an invisible, immovable wall. The crowd gasped. Death Arms strained, his muscles bulging, but he couldn't move his arm forward another millimeter. Impressive. Overturn's voice, amplified by the news microphones, was calm, resonant, and dripping with condescension. All that power. All that crude, brutish force. A relic of a bygone era. He made a subtle twisting motion with his fingers. Death Arms screamed, a raw, agonized sound, as his arm was twisted at an impossible angle. The sickening crack of bone breaking echoed across the plaza. Overturn then casually flicked his wrist, and the powerhouse pro-hero was sent flying, tumbling end over end until he crashed into a nearby fountain. The bank robbers, seeing this, decided to make a run for it, firing their automatic weapons wildly. Overturn simply turned to face them, a bored expression on his face. The bullets leaving their rifles slowed, stopped in midair, and hung there for a moment, shimmering like a swarm of deadly insects. With another lazy gesture, he sent the bullets reversing their course. The robbers screamed as their own ammunition tore into them, dropping them in a bloody heap. Overturn then turned to face the nearest news camera, a faint, messianic smile on his lips. "People of Star City," he announced, his voice smooth and charismatic. "For too long you have been lied to. You have been told to put your faith in these so-called heroes, the ones with flashy, genetic gifts, who treat protecting you like a sporting event. And worse, you have been told to respect the relics. The throwbacks. The powerless vigilantes who cling to the shadows, fighting with sticks and stones, pretending to be more than human." His eyes seemed to stare directly through the camera, into every home in the city. "I am here to usher in a new era. An era of true power. My name is Overturn, and I am the next stage of human evolution. I am here to demonstrate the obsolescence of the old ways. And I will start with your beloved Emerald Archer." He turned and walked away, the police too stunned and terrified to stop him as he melted into the crowd. The broadcast sent a shockwave through the city, and a deep, chilling silence through the Arrow Cave. Izuku, Oliver, Diggle, and Felicity stood watching the replay on the main monitor, the scene playing out again and again. "His quirk," Izuku began, his voice barely a whisper as he frantically scribbled in his notebook, his mind already dissecting the footage. "It's some form of kinetic energy manipulation. He stops subjects in motion, redirects them. It's not just telekinesis. He's not just moving things with his mind. He's controlling their kinetic state. The force Death Arms generated didn't just disappear. He absorbed it, and used it to break his arm. The bullets, He reversed their velocity vectors perfectly. He's a monster, Felicity said, her face pale. He took down one of the city's top 10 ranked pro heroes without breaking a sweat. And he didn't even kill him. He just broke him, humiliated him. It was a statement, a declaration of war. Diggle added, his jaw tight. And he just called you out by name, Oliver. Oliver's expression was grim. His eyes narrowed as he watched the footage of Overturn's arrogant, smiling face. He wants to make an example of me. The quirkless vigilante. He's trying to establish a new world order, and I'm the symbol of the old one he wants to tear down. You can't face him, Diggle said immediately, his voice firm. Not head on. Did you see what he did to those bullets? Your arrows would be useless. He'd turn them into your own personal pincushion. Dig's right, Felicity chimed in, her fingers already flying across her keyboard, pulling up every piece of data she could find on the man. We have no intel on him. No identity, no history. He just appeared. We need to find a weakness before you even think about engaging. He has to have one, Izuku muttered, pacing back and forth, his mind a frantic storm of variables. Every quirk has a limitation, a drawback. Maybe it's a range issue? Or perhaps it requires line of sight? Could it be tied to his stamina? Manipulating that much kinetic energy must have a biological cost. We don't have time to find out in a lab, Oliver said, his voice a low, resolute growl. He turned away from the screen and headed toward the suit displays. He's made a public challenge. If I don't answer it, if I hide in the shadows, he wins. Fear is his greatest weapon right now. The city needs to see that someone is willing to stand up to him. Oliver, this is suicide, Diggle protested, following him. No, Oliver said, stopping in front of the case holding his current suit. This is a hunt. He's arrogant. He's theatrical. He wants a stage. He'll make another public appearance, and when he does, I'll be there. I'm not going to fight him on his terms. I'll be in the shadows. One shot. One specialized arrow. An EMP to disrupt his control, maybe a high-frequency sonic arrow. Something he won't see coming. It was a plan born of necessity, but it was a plan. For the next 2 days, the cave was a hive of tense activity. Felicity and Izuku worked side by side, analyzing the footage frame by frame, running simulations, trying to find any flicker of weakness in Overturn's power. Oliver and Diggle trained, sparring with a ferocity that bordered on violent, preparing for a fight against an enemy whose abilities seemed absolute. The call came on the third night. Overturn appeared at a massive charity gala held at the Star City Museum of Art. He didn't crash the party. He walked in like an honored guest. Panic erupted. The city's wealthiest and most powerful citizens scrambled for the exits, their screams echoing in the marble halls. There's no need for alarm. Overturn's voice boomed through the museum's PA system, which he had apparently commandeered. I am simply here to acquire a new piece for my collection, and to wait for a special guest. He's cornered them, Felicity said, her voice tight as she monitored the situation from the cave. SCPD has the building surrounded, but they won't go in. Not after what happened to Death Arms. Oliver, he's baiting you. I see him. Oliver's voice crackled through the comms. He was already on the scene, perched on the roof of a building across the street, his bow in hand. The main atrium. He's got the hostages gathered in the center. What's your plan? Diggle asked, his voice a low growl of concern. I'm not giving him a direct fight, Oliver said. I'm going in through the skylights. Quietly. I take the shot, you and the police move in on the confusion. Deku, talk to me. What do you see? Izuku was at his own station in the cave, his eyes darting between a thermal scan of the museum and the building's blueprints. His hands were steady, his voice clear. The terror he'd felt during his first field mission had been replaced by a cold, sharp focus. The atrium is a tactical nightmare, Izuku reported. Wide open spaces, minimal cover. He's positioned himself in the center, a full 360-degree field of view. The skylights are reinforced glass, but there's a maintenance hatch on the north side you can bypass. It will put you on the catwalks directly above him. Perfect, Oliver said. I'm going dark. Izuku watched a single green dot representing Oliver move across his screen. He held his breath as the dot slipped inside the museum. The next few minutes were agonizingly silent. Then, Oliver's voice came back, a harsh, strained whisper. I have the shot. Take it, Diggle commanded. A tense silence. Then, it's not working, Oliver said, his voice laced with disbelief. My arrow, it's just hanging in the air. Izuku's blood ran cold. He zoomed in on the thermal scan. He could see the faint heat signature of Oliver on the catwalk. And below, in the center of the room, he saw Overturn, his head tilted back, a triumphant smirk on his face as he looked up at the ceiling. And in the air between them, frozen in place, was the unmistakable shape of an arrow. He knew, Izuku breathed. He knew you were there. It's a trap, Felicity yelled. Citizens of Star City! Overturn's voice suddenly boomed through the comms, somehow hijacking their secure frequency. Your cowardly protector is here! Hiding in the rafters like the rat he is. Allow me to draw him out. On the thermal scan, Izuku saw Overturn raise a hand. The massive, multi-ton sculpture in the center of the atrium, a great, abstract swirl of steel and bronze, lifted from its pedestal. Oliver, get out of there! Now! Diggle roared. The sculpture hurtled upward, smashing through the catwalk where Oliver had been perched. There was a deafening crash of metal and a shower of sparks. Oliver's heat signature vanished from the screen. Oliver! Felicity screamed. For a heart-stopping 10 seconds, there was nothing but static and the sound of Overturn's mocking laughter. Then, a new signature appeared, at the far end of the atrium. Oliver. He had leaped from the collapsing catwalk, swinging on a grappling hook arrow to safety. But he was no longer hidden. He was on the main floor, exposed. There you are, Overturn said, turning to face him. The man of the people. The quirkless wonder. Let's see what you're made of. What followed was not a fight. It was a dissection. Oliver fired a volley of arrows, each a different type. A flashbang, an explosive tip, a bola. Each one stopped dead in the air, a few feet from Overturn, and dropped harmlessly to the marble floor. Crude, Overturn sneered. Predictable. Oliver abandoned his bow, switching to hand-to-hand combat. He was a whirlwind of motion, a master martial artist closing the distance with incredible speed. He threw a punch, a perfectly executed strike aimed at Overturn's jaw. It never landed. His fist stopped, just as Death Arms had, an inch from its target. Pathetic, Overturn whispered. He grabbed Oliver's extended arm. Oliver tried to pull back, but his arm wouldn't move, held fast by an unseen force. With a contemptuous flick of his wrist, Overturn sent Oliver flying across the atrium. The hero crashed through a glass display case, a shower of shattered history raining down on him. He struggled to his feet, his body already bruised and battered. He threw a flechette, a small, sharp throwing dart. Overturn caught it between his thumb and forefinger without even looking. Is that all? He taunted. He raised a hand, and the arrows that had been lying inert on the floor lifted into the air. All of them. They turned, their razor-sharp tips now pointing directly at their owner. No, Izuku whispered, watching the horror unfold on the screen. A poetic end, don't you think? Overturn said, a sadistic glee in his voice. To be unmade by your own tools. With a grand, orchestral gesture, he sent the arrows flying. Oliver moved, dodging, weaving, a desperate dance for survival. He was a master of evasion, but he couldn't dodge them all. One arrow sliced his arm. Another buried itself in his leg, sending him stumbling to one knee. A third grazed his ribs, drawing a sharp cry of pain. He was bleeding. He was beaten. He looked up, his face a mask of pain and defiance, at the man who was so effortlessly destroying him. I am the future archer, Overturn declared, stalking toward the downed hero. And you are obsolete. He raised his hand for a final, killing blow. But before he could deliver it, the massive, reinforced windows of the atrium exploded inward in a shower of glass. Diggle, wearing a tactical helmet and carrying a high-caliber rifle, stormed in, laying down a hail of suppressive fire. He wasn't aiming at Overturn. He was aiming around him, at the walls, the floor, creating a chaotic storm of ricochets and debris. The distraction was all Oliver needed. He fired his last arrow, not at Overturn, but at the ceiling. A grappling hook. He hit the ascent button on his bow, and he was yanked upward, out of the line of fire, just as Diggle tossed a series of smoke grenades, flooding the atrium with a thick, choking fog. By the time the smoke cleared, they were gone. Overturn stood alone in the center of the ruined museum, the hostages cowering in the corner. He didn't look angry. He looked pleased. He had won. He had proven his point in the most public and brutal way imaginable. Green Arrow was broken. The journey back to the cave was a blur of controlled panic. Diggle drove with a grim, white-knuckled intensity. When they brought Oliver into the medbay, the sight of him made Izuku's stomach turn. His suit was torn and stained with blood. The arrow was still lodged in his thigh. His body was a canvas of deep, ugly bruises. As Felicity and Diggle worked to stabilize him, sedating him and carefully removing the arrow, Izuku stood frozen, watching from the doorway. He felt a profound, soul-crushing helplessness. All his analysis, all his theories, all his training, it had all amounted to nothing. He had sat in a safe chair, hundreds of feet below the city, and watched his mentor, his hero, be systematically tortured and humiliated. He saw the looks on Diggle's and Felicity's faces. The fear. The despair. They had seen Oliver hurt before, but this was different. This wasn't a wound from a bullet or a knife. This was a defeat on a conceptual level. Overturn hadn't just beaten Green Arrow's body, he had negated his entire methodology. His every tool, his every skill, had been rendered useless. When Oliver was stable and sleeping under the effects of powerful sedatives, Izuku retreated to the main computer console. The replay of the fight was already queued up. He hit play. He watched it once, twice, 10 times. He watched his hero get thrown around like a rag doll. He watched his own arrows get turned against him. He listened to Overturn's arrogant, confident voice declaring him obsolete. The helplessness began to curdle, solidifying into something else. A cold, hard, burning rage. Bakugo's sneering voice echoed in his memory. That fossil got what he deserved for trying to play in a superpowered world. Was he right? Was this entire endeavor, this quirkless crusade, nothing but a fool's errand? A tragic, pathetic attempt to hold back an inevitable tide? No, he wouldn't accept that. Oliver had taken a chance on him. Diggle had started to trust him. Felicity believed in him. He owed them more than despair. He owed them a solution. His despair turned into resolve. His helplessness turned into focus. He pulled up a fresh screen, his fingers flying across the keyboard, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of the monitor. He pushed his own fear and pain down, compartmentalizing it. All that mattered was the problem, Overturn. He began a new page in his notebook. He drew Overturn's face, not as a fanboy sketching a hero, but as a profiler sketching a target. He broke down the fight, frame by agonizing frame. He analyzed every gesture, every word, every micro-expression. He ignored the pain and the humiliation of the event itself, and saw only the data. There was a weakness. There had to be. He had been so powerful, so absolute, that it defied the laws of thermodynamics. That kind of energy manipulation had to have a cost, a flaw, a tell. And he would find it. He would sit at that console all night. He would rewatch the footage until his eyes burned. He would analyze every scrap of data until his brain ached. He would not sleep. He would not rest. He would tear this monster apart, piece by digital piece, until he found the chink in his armor. He had watched his mentor fall. Now, it was his turn to find a way for them to get back up. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun.